And now this, the biggest surprise of all, at least to me, I didn't think it would ever happen. I remember Trump bragging about doing the biggest peace deal, the deal of the century, he called it, in the Middle East. And I thought, you know, some deals can't be done. Those folks have been fighting literally since biblical times. But look at this, look at this. Here's the news in the New York Times. I chose this paper because they're really Trump's biggest enemy, and they're not particularly a fan of Israel either. But they just couldn't help but admit the obvious. This was a massive deal. Let me quote. Israel and United Arab Emirates strike major diplomatic agreement. President Trump announced that Israel and the United Arab Emirates would establish, quote, full normalization of relations, and that in exchange Israel would forgo, for now, declaring sovereignty over occupied West Bank territory. They put 4 reporters on the story with the byline, and they had 4 other reporters who they credited for researching it. So the New York Times put 8 staff on this story. That's incredible. It's a huge story. I won't even go into it other than, can I just read a little bit about Trump's role and the meaning? Just give me 1 minute. In a surprise announcement of the White House, after a 3-way phone call with Israeli and Emirati leaders, Mr. Trump said the deal would lead to greater cooperation on investment, tourism, security, technology, energy, and other areas, while the 2 countries move to allow regular direct passenger flights, open embassies, and trade ambassadors for the first time. If fulfilled, the pact would make the Emirates only the 3rd Arab country to have normal diplomatic relations with Israel, along with Egypt, which signed a peace agreement in 1979, and Jordan, which signed a treaty in 1994. It could reorder the long stalemate in the region, potentially leading other Arab nations to follow suit in forging an increasingly explicit alliance with Israel against their mutual enemy in Iran, while taking Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's explosive annexation plan off the table, at least for now, unquote. That's a big deal. The United Arab Emirates, you know, that's the place with Dubai, right? With Abu Dhabi. It's the most liberal, most progressive, most modern, most Western parts of Arabia. You know, the Burj Khalifa, that's the tallest tower in the world. That place. They just made a deal with Israel. Here's a pretty cool tweet by Netanyahu about it. I'll sort of translate. He basically says the United Arab Emirates is one of the most powerful and advanced countries in the world. As you can see, it is also one of the most beautiful places in the world. Yesterday we made peace for peace. And he says that in Arabic and Hebrew. Salam alaikum, shalom aleichem. I thought that was pretty cool. And now I see that not only will there be direct flights between Tel Aviv and Dubai, but there are negotiations that those flights would pass over Saudi Arabia. I think that's pretty incredible. Look at this in the Globe and Mail. Israel says that other moderate Gulf states are next in line. Oman, Bahrain. These are more moderate Gulf states that share the UAE's general outlook and know that Iran is a great threat to all of them, and Israel is the best counterweight to that. And they also don't know why their ties to Israel should be held up because of intransigence on the part of the PLO or Hamas, which keeps sabotaging peace deals with Israel, who reject peace deals every time they get offered. You see things like this. Netanyahu being interviewed live on Arabic satellite TV. In this case, the interviewer was speaking Arabic. Netanyahu was getting a translation, answering in English, and they had a translator in Arabic. But the questions were genuine interview questions, not anti-Semitic harangues. Both sides seem eager and excited. Peace, prosperity, getting over a hatred. You know, it takes energy to stay mad. Why would Israel and Dubai have any reason to be mad at each other? Why? Because Hamas or Iran wants them to? Look at this. Iran and Turkey, which are both Islamist, hate this deal. For some reason, China likes it. I don't quite know why. I see that Israel is in talks with the U.S. about banning Huawei, and that's good news. So, look, I'm excited. Wouldn't it be great if peace broke out? It's so unthinkable. You'll notice in the New York Times piece, they say they were surprised by the announcement. Trump managed to do this huge deal, and so did Israel and the UAE without any media leaks. That is very surprising, isn't it? I see hints that other African countries might join too. There are Muslim countries in Africa, of course. Did Donald Trump just get a big Middle East peace deal? Did he get the deal of the century? Not just some PR announcement, but a real deal? Maybe, as Netanyahu described it, it was peace for peace, not peace for land or peace for cash. Both sides want the same thing. They want peace. It's true Israel says it won't annex Palestinian territories, But Israel has not annexed those territories since Israel recaptured them in the War of 1967. So if Israel hasn't felt the need to change their name in the past 53 years, I don't think that's an onerous concession for Israel to make. I think it's peace for peace. And the promise not to annex helps the deal go down more sweetly in the Arab street. It's fine by me. Look at this tweet by a senior Muslim imam in the UAE. He said, "The happiness of the Israeli people with the peace agreement shocked me. I was not expecting it. The peoples want peace." Now, I think that's funny because you got to imagine the misinformation, the mistrust, that he actually thought Israel didn't want peace. He believed that, and he's shocked that they do. Now the countries can talk, they can actually visit each other, they can do business with each other, they can live a little bit more like neighbors now. I read more from that Muslim imam. He's based, I think, in Abu Dhabi, which is the capital of the UAE. He's got more than 1.5 million followers on Twitter, so he's a bit of a big deal in the UAE. Here's a few more of his comments. Let me just read a few of them. His name is Wasim Youssef. He says, here he is, he's mad that Al Jazeera was criticizing the deal. He was hurt by Al Jazeera. Of course he was. Here he is, startled that Jewish Israelis were putting up UAE flags, while Palestinians were burning UAE flags, calling the UAE sellouts. He can't believe what he's seeing. He said, "When I saw the flag of my country being burned by some Palestinians because of the peace treaty with Israel, I apologize to every Israeli man if you offended him in the past." Right? And this guy's like the Billy Graham of the UAE in terms of size and influence, I think, from what I can find. He was thrilled with the peace deal, but just as much he's furious that there are those who want no peace for the UAE for their own reasons. I think his reaction is a really good sign. There really are moderate Muslim leaders in the world, I think. Tell me that's not good news for everyone. It's not just good news for Israel. That's an excerpt from my daily show, the Ezra Levant Show. Every day I do a monologue on the news of the day, then I interview an interesting guest, and then I read my hate mail. You gotta subscribe. Go to rebelnews.com.